I am playing very aggressively with white and very solidly with black. Now, that distinction isn't that meaningful still, because most games I'm winning basically in the opening. But when I reach right around 1,000 or 1,100, I think the distinction is going to be more meaningful. And what that means is we're playing a lot of gambits with white. We're continuing to attempt to play the Danish gambit. Nobody's actually taken the pawns yet. With black, we're playing very solid openings. Queen's gambit decline, Caro-Kann. We're going to incorporate the French openings that emphasize conceptual understanding, closed positions, pawn structure, stuff that, you know, people kind of shy away from because it's either, in my opinion, poorly explained, or it's often presented in such a way as to make it seem like it's inaccessible to the average chess player, which it's absolutely not, and that's a ridiculous presupposition. So we're trying to cover a lot of ground here. Now, because these are 10-minute games, I'm explaining more stuff during the game itself, and the post-mortems are taking us less time. That's just by design. Let's go ahead and seek a 10-minute game. We're playing with the black pieces against Mustafa 096. And speaking of the Caro-Kann, that is like the OG solid opening, c6. Now, most people at this level don't really know what to do against the Caro-Kann. Some have never seen this move before. Let's see how he responds. And bishop c4 is a pretty common reaction. Okay, queen h5. So that's another common reaction for those who have never really seen the Caro-Kann, although I haven't particularly seen that one before. So how should we respond to this? How should we respond to this? And there's many ways to do it. I mean, we can go d5. We don't have to react to this at all. But if we were to react to it, a solid idea is to play knight f6 and just get that queen out of there. Okay, queen e2. And now we can continue with our... Actually, knight f6 it may have been inaccurate because he has e5. It's funny because knight f6 may have been a little bit impulsive. Okay, he doesn't do it, though. It doesn't really matter. So we take with the c-pawn. Again, we already have an amazing position. We have a knight developed. We have the center. And he's moved his queen 3 times now. That's pretty ridiculous. So we talked about... Thank you, Coach Grant. We talked about the sort of the correct... ratio of pawn moves to piece development moves here, right? And we can either play e5 here in this position, or we can develop the other knight. In the solid part of the speedrun, i.e. in the black games, I'm really emphasizing adherence to principles. So, as much as I would like to control the center, let's focus instead on developing our pieces, because that's always going to be the most important. It's a lot more important to develop the pieces properly and to control a little bit more of the center. And speaking of developing the pieces properly, as I explained earlier today, this is not a pin that we are afraid of, because this pawn is very faithfully defending the knight. We don't need to play a6. We don't need to play bishop d7 here and consign the bishop to a very passive existence. Instead, where can we put this bishop? Where can we put this bishop? Yeah, so we can still play e5, but I'm deliberately refraining from this. Yeah, so f5 is possible, but why not g4? I like bishop g4, guys, because this attacks the queen. And great, so now we induced f3. Now we can step back to f5, and this is a huge weakness that is even more amplified by the fact, oh god, by the fact that he's not developing any of his pieces. All right, great. Come at me, go h4. The more weaknesses he makes, the better. All right. So, where should we go with the knight? This is an interesting question. Where should we go with the knight? Because, and there's more than one correct answer here. There's really several ways to think about it. But I want to violate a rule that says knights on the rim are grim. All right. So, knight h5 is what I really like here, right? Because this is the Frankfurt Airport analogy. This is the Frankfurt Airport analogy. Because the knight on h5 may seem to be ugly, but it's aiming for this very juicy square on f4. It's putting pressure on it. Now, you might look at this and say, wait a second. White can play knight e2 and defend the square on f4, right? And we're not getting to f4, but this plays into the concept of putting pressure on something versus occupying it, right? Putting pressure on something can be very valuable, even if you're not immediately going to put a piece on that square. Because essentially you're creating a situation where white now has to keep a piece as a sentinel at all times to this square. And we can still put the knight on f4, we can play e5, for example. But in this specific position, we should be very attentive to a tactical property. Yeah, good job, Trex says. Thank you, Sir Beerby and Siobhan TV. So we look at the bishop, it's undefended. If you guys have done Puzzle Battle or Puzzle Rush in any kind of quantity, this is something which should be automatic. Right? And I'll explain putting pressure a little bit more, which is Queen a5 check. That's a fork. But the situation is complicated because he can play Knight c3, defending the bishop. But now that runs into a pin. And even though the knight is defended by the pawn is the worst enemy of a pinned piece, right? When a pawn attacks a pinned piece, you're very often screwed, and that is the case here. We're winning the knight here. We're going to be up a piece, and white's king side is in shambles, so essentially the game is over. Yeah. So just because I'm playing solid chess on the black side of the speedrun doesn't mean I'm not winning pieces when that opportunity presents itself. Let's take the knight. Okay, he takes, we'll take. He takes, we'll take. He has to block with the bishop, otherwise he loses the rook. Now, where should we drop the queen? Where should we put the queen? Yeah, this is basically GG. We should put it on e5 with check. Yeah, exactly. And now we should not forget to apply the principle that I've sort of hammered into everyone's heads, which is that we shouldn't look for anything extraordinary in a position like this. We should simply identify what we need to do. And what I mean by that is we haven't completed our development, right? We have a bishop that's not developed yet. We have a king that's in the center. Let's not play with fire. So let's just play e6, develop our bishop and castle. Meat and potatoes, plain old Joe kind of move. And yet a lot of people slip up because they start looking for something crazy. Okay, bishop c3, not scary. His position is full of holes and full of weaknesses. So we should look around the board. What are these weaknesses? We can take the pawn on g5, right? If you have this mentality, you're looking for white's weaknesses. This is pretty easy to spot. Now he gives us another pawn. We can take that pawn, obviously. Yeah, why don't we? We can also give a check on h4. It really doesn't matter. It's completely winning position, and you know, in this kind of position anything wins as long as it's reasonable. So rook f1. Okay, what now? You can take another pawn here, but in the name of being Russian school of chess, very simple, very disciplined. What is very disciplined? Queen is recheck and forcing queen trade. Yes, boring chess. We play very boring chess right now, okay? And there forces queen trade. He very tilted. Yeah, we're gonna take the queen. I'm gonna try to play this very clinically, guys. So we want to bring the bishop out still, right? Just because it's an endgame doesn't mean you have a license to not complete your development. But if we bring the bishop out, then he's gonna take on g7, right? I know that's not a big deal. I know we're up a piece in a bunch of stuff. It doesn't matter. But let's assume that it does matter. Let's practice the correct approach. We play f6. We make the bishop bite on granite, to use my favorite phrase. Now, perhaps some of you are saying, well, isn't this a weakening move? But remember, we've traded queens. We're not even going to castle here. We're going to play king d7. We're literally going to keep the king in the center. And now we can get the bishop out, right? So, yeah, this never play f6 notion, you know, I love Ben, but you've got to be careful about it. Like, I know it's a meme by this point, but okay, let's take this pawn. I'm just going to take all of his pawns, just out of principle. You guys don't mind, of course. So now a quick tactical exercise. If you put on your sort of tactical spectacles, you will notice that the king and the rook are on the same diagonal. This is something you should have noticed earlier. And the bishop can maneuver hitting this rook to c4. Yeah, good job, guys. And boom, and another boom. And we're up a rook. He's going to give us a check on b7. I can almost guarantee you he's going to give us a check. Or he's going to resign. It's going to be one of the two. There it is. What should we do? Well, don't automatically move your king. Remember, whenever you get a check that you don't expect, there are 3 ways of defending against a check. You can capture the piece that is delivering the check. Not possible here. You can move the king, or you can block the check, right? Repeat that mantra to yourself when you face a check that perhaps you didn't expect. Because that way, when you're thrown off of your game, you can forget to look at this stuff. Okay, let's go rook b8. Let's just, trade rooks. He should resign here. I mean, he is dead. It doesn't even matter. Okay, just giving up all of his pawns. He could probably play here too. But yeah. Let's go g5. Yes, HS, and we won't discuss that at length. Yeah, I'm just going to win this bishop too. All right. Good game, Mustafa. Yeah. Okay, so this was a relatively simple game. The funny thing is here, yeah, like I said, knight f6 might have been a bit of an error. I think d5 was more flexible. Thank you, Mista. Because once we went d5, he can play e5 and attack the knight. And he can build something resembling a traditional Caro-Kann out of this. So that's just a small note. Once he takes and drops his queen back, I would have just brought my knight to b6 and then developed the bishop to f5, just like you would in the advanced Caro, which I'm sure we'll have many games in a little bit later. So be patient. We'll be able to discuss this structure later. But yeah, so like here, bishop g4, right? This is a move that I think some people have an aversion to playing because, yeah, I could have played e5, yeah. Because I feel like people just find it uncomfortable to put a piece on any square where it makes contact with something. But like, this is a simple thing to understand, right? Your knight is defending the bishop. There's no, there's nothing to it. And if white blocks with the knight, then you create a pin, and then you can play e6. And the move f3 is a huge asset for black. This is a great thing that you have provoked here. I agree. I think if I may attempt to put some words in people's mouths, which I like doing, I think in addition to the contact, what's scary is the fact that f3 attacks the bishop, right? People don't want to put a piece on a square where it can be attacked, right? I think I'm being accurate here. But that's what provoking is. This concept of provoking in chess is a very powerful one. And if you look at Grandmaster games, I can give you plenty of examples where you literally put your piece on a square, you provoke a move, and then you bring your piece back to where it came from. You literally spend 2 tempi just to provoke a tiny weakness. And this is an advanced concept at the highest level, but at this kind of level, everybody should understand why black benefits from this. Right? Barnsey, thank you for the prime. Yeah, bishop h5 is fine. I feel like the bishop is a little bit out of play here. I just feel like it's a little bit more solid on f5, but it's possible. Thank you, Z-Cons. Appreciate it. Yeah, Hawkjuice, that's exactly right. Anything on this diagonal would be great, either a bishop or a queen. That's what I was thinking of in the end. And bishop d7 is fine, but slightly too passive. I don't see, like I said before, I don't really see the need to kill the pin here. It's not particularly dangerous. Right. So I hope that makes sense. g4, bishop g6. Yeah, definitely check stockfish for sure. Okay, so knight h5 should make sense. Knight h5 should make sense, guys, because I explained this move. We're aiming for f4. Can you explain the weakness for us, dum-dums? No, not at all, of course. So there is the dictionary definition, and then there is the sort of, let's call it the working definition, right? The colloquial definition, what I use. And the two are overlapping, consider like a Venn diagram, right? The sort of dictionary definition of a weak square, right? Let's consider the concept of a weak square as a proxy for weaknesses, because weaknesses aren't only squares. You can have a pawn that is weak. It basically fits the same definition. A weak square is a square that cannot be defended by a pawn, right? So weak squares, of course, are color-based. Like white could have a weak square, black could have a weak square. So this f4 square is weak by definition because white doesn't have an e-pawn that could have defended it, and white's g-pawn cannot move backward to defend it. Does that make sense? Sorry, I kind of butchered that a little bit. I think you get what I'm saying. So if no pawn could defend a particular square, then that square is considered weak. The problem with this definition is that you can... No, Caro-Kann is probably the best opening. Caro-Kann is probably top 3. Now, you can look at this position and say, well, by that token, this is a weakness, and this is a weakness, and even this is a weakness, and this is a weakness. Like, what's the meaning of this term if you can just point to most of the squares in your opponent's position and say that they're weak? And that's where the sort of qualification comes in, right? Because not all weak squares are meaningful. The weak squares that are most meaningful are the ones that you, A, have some sort of potential to occupy with your pieces, and B, ones which, if you do occupy with your pieces, actually give you some sort of benefit, right? So that's essentially what a weak square is. That's what a weakness is. And that's how you should think of it. You should think of it as a square or a piece that's poorly defended. Okay. So d3, queen a5 check. And at this point, we win. The bishop and the game is over. Knight c3, d4. All right, guys. If I may be direct, some of you are a little bit or way too interested in creating this ranking of openings. There's no such thing as a ranking of openings. When I said top 3, I meant it sort of more generally. Caro-Kann is considered one of the most... It's a legendary on the tier list, you know. It's A on the tier list. It's together with a Najdorf and the Berlin as what's currently considered to be among the best objective openings. The closest black can come to guaranteeing equality, even against best play. All right? So if you're a beginner, you shouldn't worry about marginal differences in openings. I don't think Hikaru said that the Caro-Kann was trash. In fact, I would be shocked if he said that. I'm sure he didn't say it. I'm sure Hikaru put it in his top category. All right, and he said it as a joke, right? Well, because Benny Watts said it. Well, you don't need Hikaru to say or me to say it's a good opening, guys. You can do some of the research on your own. And yeah, of course he does. Yeah, but Benny Watts is just trash talking the Caro. Even he would perfectly approve of the Caro-Kann. All pawns and no hope. Yeah. Now, also please understand that there is a distinction to be made between openings that are objectively good or bad and openings that are recommended or not recommended for a beginner. So the Danish Gambit is a legendary opening for beginners. But on the grand scheme of things, it's like a C or D opening on like a Magnus Carlsen scale, right? Because white is worse if black knows what to do. So, that's where that gradation comes in. And I said that earlier today. That you should not choose openings based on what Magnus Carlsen would think of them, but rather based on how that opening helps you maximize your learning process as you try to get a hold of the basic principles and apply them and get good positions, okay? Any opening that you should play should emphasize development. It should have a tactical component to it. That's basically all that's required, and there's plenty of options. Let's continue. M color 23. So let's hope that we finally have a chance to play the Danish Gambit. And, when people start thinking here, they generally don't take. But we'll see. F6 is a horrible move. That is literally one of the worst moves in this position. Now, we've talked about the sort of Damiano approach. Even after knight f3, this is a bad move. What should white do here? Should we give this immediate check on h5, is that a good idea? No, it's not a good idea, because then black will play g6. But we first want to take on e5, and if he takes, he basically loses. Yeah. This is like the Damiano, except we haven't even sacrificed the knight. Yeah, and this takes e5, and we win the rook. This is as old as the hills, and that basically wins the game. So this is a good dry run, guys, as to like how much success you could have if you play the Danish. We've never actually even played the Danish, and we are already winning games in like 4 moves. All right. Yeah, this hurts for sure. And it's, you know, we can understand him, and we shouldn't, you know, laugh at somebody for that. I mean, it's like, f6 is a pretty natural move, I think, when you think about it. You're defending the pawn. But some people don't fully understand. When you're a beginner, you don't fully understand the sort of the consequences of weakening your king side like that. So here white has to be precise. And it's a very good idea to not screw around with your queen. That queen is trapped, and in order to untrap it, we should use the fact that the queen is pinning the bishop. A relatively elementary tactical move, bishop h6, comes to mind. This will essentially force a queen trade. Some of you may be deterred by this, by the presence of queen takes c4 check, but then we just cover that. And here, we don't actually have to take on f8 immediately. That's not going anywhere for the time being. We can just develop our knight first and defend the pawn. And then when the moment is right, we can take on f8. We still don't have to take on f8. We can make another development move. What development move should we make? Yeah, I play chess on my phone. Yeah, castles. Well, yeah, castles is fine actually. I was just focusing. Knight g4 here exists, but it works out for us. Although we have to be careful. Yeah, knight f7. So he comes up with an ingenious idea, but now we can take on f8. We wait until the last moment, and then we take. But if you're a beginner, I would take immediately. Here you're in the hands of a professional. So yeah, so here a good idea would be to play f4, just advancing another pawn into the center. All right, so knight g4 clearly attacks that square on f2. We have several ways to defend against it. One of which is rook d2. The other is knight h3. Between those two moves, let's play rook d2, because we don't want our knight sitting on the rim and sort of consigned to defending that pawn. Here we can chase away black's knight with h3. This is completely winning. We're up a full rook and a couple pawns. Nothing to really say here other than just develop your pieces, exercise common sense. We don't even have to play h3 yet. We can go knight f3. And I always try to make this point, right? This notion that when your opponent has a piece on your side of the board, you don't need to always rush to chase it away. You need to understand what that piece is doing, and we will chase it away eventually, but I'm trying to illustrate that point. And now we go e5, forking the two knights. All right. Okay, so what should we do here? What should we do here? Yeah, we should take on d6, because that gives us 2 pieces for a rook. We are 2 pieces up, full 2 pieces up. Let's complete our development and win the game. We bring our rook into the game. Notice how I'm, even in the endgame, bringing all of my pieces into the game. I'm not screwing around here. Not always. I mean, the word always in chess is a dangerous word, right? And okay, he resigns and he loses hope there. Yeah, that was definitely a pretty easy game given that he played f6. If black declines the center game, then he should play d6. That's the better way to do it. Although this is far from ideal, because white can transpose to the Philidor, or white can play de. This endgame, while okay for black, is not great, because black has lost castling rights here. So there's no need for that. I mean, if you're playing black, you have to, and you decide to play 1e5, you kind of have to go for this. That's sort of part of the deal, you know, part of the package. And nobody, you know, we've reached this position, I think, once, and the guy played c5. Nobody has taken on c3 yet, which is a testament to the fact that if you put some effort into choosing the right openings, particularly with white, you really are almost guaranteeing yourself good positions in every single game. And so that's why I fundamentally dispute this notion that a lot of coaches propagate that you shouldn't spend any time on the opening before you're like 1600. I think that's actually ridiculous, for that reason. You should spend a lot of time on the opening. Because even if your technique is not up to the Grandmaster's technique, just statistically, if you get good positions every game, you're going to expose yourself to better types of positions and you're going to win more games. It's not rocket science. So I'm also not suggesting that the Danish is the only good type of Gambit. It's one of many possible lines, but it's definitely something I can strongly recommend. All right, guys. So let's pause the stream for today. We actually went for 3.5 hours. That was longer than I expected. And if there's any last questions, guys, ask them now. What questions? I will take a couple questions before we sign off. King's Gambit is good. What do you think this no openings until you are X comes from? That's a great question. So where does it come from? Yes. No. So where it comes from, in my take, is that I think that coaches have a well-intentioned fear and a well-founded fear that somebody will try to memorize their way to chess mastery, or that somebody will try to read an entire opening book rated 700 and kill their early chess development and kill their love for the game, trying to memorize everything. But I think that chess, like now, the abundance of resources, nobody's really going to try to do that. And some memorization is fine. I think that it should be made clear that you shouldn't try to memorize entire reams of opening theory unless you're, Wesley So or a GM. But a little bit of memorization is a bit of a taboo thing in chess. Like it's okay to attempt to memorize the main lines. You have to memorize the main lines, right, of any opening that you play, because that frees up space for our actual understanding, right? Let's see. I'm not sure, of course, what you mean by that. Let me see. Book recommendation. So closed positions, I'm pretty sure there's some chess.com courses, but I'll think questions about books and material I'll think about separately. Let's see. How do we push to 2000 again? That's a very general question. I can't condense that. No, losing castling rights is definitely not quite that bad if your queens are off the board, but it's not great. Yeah, so the French. Okay, guys. So let me address the French for a second, because I know people are really curious about it. The French is, I would say, probably a B tier opening in terms of its objective value. So actually, white has not found an advantage against the French, objectively. But in order to maintain it, in order to play well, black has to know insane amounts of dangerous lines, and white has found many, many ways to put pressure on the French. And so it's not, objectively speaking, it's not necessarily worse than the knight or for the Caro-Kann, but from a practical perspective, even for grandmasters, playing the French is very dangerous, because also potentially very rewarding, because it unbalances the position. But you have to be tremendously well versed in a just massive amount of dangerous lines, if that makes sense. But it's not terrible. No grandmaster worth their salt would ever say that. And people who joke about it for that reason, because black loses a lot of quick games, even grandmasters, because if you forget a single move, you just get crushed. And the Najdorf is the same way, but not quite, right? The Tarash is fine for beginners. I recommend the advanced variation for beginners because it teaches you how to play with better central control and good piece development. In the last game, can you talk a little bit more about knowing when to wait and when to pull the trigger on those captures you can wait on? Can you give me a specific? Oh, like this. Yeah. So this is a bit of a technicality because there's nothing wrong with taking immediately. But the logic here is, am I in a hurry to take on f8? Can he avoid this if I don't do it, right? And the answer is no. Like, there's nothing Black can do in this position to disallow the option of queen takes f8 on the next move. So in order to preserve flexibility, because maybe I will want to not trade, because maybe he'll do something like queen e5 or queen e6, right? And then I take with checkmate. So it's all about flexibility, being able to deviate as much as possible. And when you're up a rook, it's purely academic. It doesn't matter. But I'm still trying to illustrate the sort of thought processes here, if that makes sense. Andy Starr, thank you for the tier 1. All right. Bishop h6 sets up a bunch of trades. All right, guys. Let's pause here for today. I will be back tomorrow. And I will be back tomorrow. Let's see when. Let me check my calendar. I will be back probably in the morning, actually, tomorrow. Yeah. I'll be back in the morning, guys. Somewhere around 11 a.m. Eastern time. I'll be back somewhere around 11 a.m. Eastern time for Coffee Blitz and good times. I hope you guys enjoyed the speedrun and the Blitz. I played so much better over the past couple of days. I'm really happy. Even though I lost a couple of games to end, but still. This was a longer stream than I expected. I'm going to head to bed, guys. Thank you so much, everybody, for all of the support. It's always a pleasure, truly. Thank you, Proffer. Thank you, everybody. I greatly appreciate this community.